Language models can explain neurons in language models. Of note, our technique works poorly for larger models, possibly because later layers are harder to explain. And even for GPT-2, which is what they used for the paper, the vast majority of our explanations score poorly. Which is to say, we still have no clue as to what's going on inside GPT-4 or even GPT-3, which I think is the question many want an answer to. This may be the first step towards that. But as they also note, the technique is already very computationally intensive. And the focus on individual neurons as a function of input means that they can't reverse engineer larger structures composed of multiple neurons, nor a neuron that has multiple roles. I would expect the former in particular to be much more common in larger models, which is perhaps why they're harder to analyze in this manner.
Funny that we never quite understood how intelligence worked, and yet it appears that we're pretty damn close to recreating it, still without knowing how it works. I wonder how often this happens in the universe.
That we're pretty damn close to recreating it. Is that evident already? Or are we fitting the definition of intelligence without being aware?
If you spent any time with GPT-4, it should be evident.
If you spent even more time with GPT-4, it would be evident that it is definitely not. Especially if you try to use it as some kind of autonomous agent.
What have you tried to do with it?
Use it to analyze the California and U.S. Code, the California and Federal Codes of Regulation, and bills currently in the California legislation and Congress. It's far from useless, but far more useful for creative writing than any kind of understanding or instruction following when it comes to complex topics. Even performing a MapReduce over large documents to summarize or analyze them for a specific audience is largely beyond it. A 32K context size is a pittance when it comes to a single title in the USC or CFR, which average into the millions of tokens each.
Interesting. Do you believe average humans, not professional lawyers, would do better on this task?
Probably not. I'm not sure that pointing out that LLMs are as useful for parsing legal code as the average human is something to brag about, though.
You're not sure that having an AI which is at least as intelligent as an average human is something to brag about? Seriously?
While impressive GPT-4 isn't intelligent or close to intelligence, it's an impressive statistical model, but doesn't have the ability to reason.
Do you have any example of how it cannot reason?
Its vast limitations in anything reasoning-based are indeed evident.
GPT-4 is better at reasoning than 90% of humans. At least. I won't be surprised if GPT-5 is better than 100% of humans. I'm saying this in complete seriousness.
Do you put yourself in the 10% or the 90%? I'm asking in complete seriousness.
Oh, it's definitely better than me at reasoning. I'm the one asking it to explain things to me, not the other way around.
If you think it's better than you at reasoning, then you cannot at all be confident in the truth of its dialogue.
I am not. I treat it as I treat any smart human being.
Okay. Here you use the word explain, which implies more of a descriptive, reducing action rather than extrapolative and constructive. As in, it can explain what it has read, and it has obviously read far more than any human. But it can't necessarily extrapolate beyond that, or use that to find new truths. To me, reasoning is more about the extrapolative, truth-finding process. Wisdom from knowledge rather than just knowledge. But maybe my definition of reasoning isn't quite right. Edit. I probably should define reasoning as solely deductive reasoning, in which case, perhaps it is better than humans. But that seems like a premature claim. On the other hand, non-deductive reasoning, I have yet to see from it. I personally can't imagine how it could do so reliably from a human perspective without real-world experiences and perceptions. I'm the sort that believes a true AGI would require a highly perceptual, space-occupying organ. In other words, it would have to be and feel embodied in time and space in order to perform other forms of reasoning.
Why don't you suggest an example we can run and see what it's capable of, compared to what I or other humans are capable of?
In case it was missed, I've added a relevant addendum to my previous comment. Not sure an example is needed because I agree it explains better than pretty much everyone. From my mostly lay perspective, It essentially uses the prompt as an argument in a probabilistic analysis of its incredibly vast store of prior inputs to transform them into an output that at least superficially satisfies the prompter's goals. This is cool and useful, to say the least. But this is only one kind of reasoning. A machine without embodied perceptual experiences simply cannot reason to the full extent of a human. It's also worth remembering that the prompter, very likely, has far less knowledge of the domain of interest and far less skill with the language of communication, so the prompter is generally quite easily impressed regardless of the truth of the output. Nothing wrong with that necessarily, especially if it is usually accurate. But again, worth remembering.
Evolution created intelligence without even being intelligent itself.
How do you know that's true?
We know that complex arrangements of neurons are triggered based on input and generating output that appears to have some intelligence to many humans. The more interesting question is, why are intelligence, beauty, consciousness emergent properties that exist in our minds?
There is no evidence that intelligence runs on neurons. Yes, there are neurons in brains, but there's also lots of other stuff in there too. And there are creatures that exhibit intelligent properties, even though they have hardly any neurons at all. An individual ant has only something like 250,000 neurons, and yet they're the only creatures beside humans that manage to create a civilization.
This is not a good take. Yes, there is a lot more going on in brains than just neuronal activity. We don't understand most of it. But understanding neurons and their connections is necessary, but not sufficient, to understanding what we consider intelligence. Also, 250K is a lot of neurons. Individual ants, as well as fruit flies which have even fewer neurons, show behavior we may consider intelligent. Source: I'm not a scientist, but I work in neuroscience research.
What's the argument that understanding neurons is necessary? Perhaps intelligence is like a black box input to our bodies. Call it the soul, even though this isn't testable, and therefore not a hypothesis. The mind, therefore, wouldn't play any more of a role in intelligence than the eye. And I'm not sure people would say the eye is necessary for understanding intelligence. Now, I'm not really in a position to argue for such a thing, even if I believe it, but I'm curious what argument you might have against it.
Why would you doubt neurons play a role in intelligence when we've seen so much success in emulating human intelligence with artificial neural networks? It might have been an interesting argument 20 years ago. It's just silly now.
In what way a civilization?
This work is part of the third pillar of our approach to alignment research. We want to automate the alignment research work itself. A promising aspect of this approach is that it scales with the pace of AI development. As future models become increasingly intelligent and helpful as assistants, we will find better explanations. On first look, this is genius, but it seems pretty tautological in a way. How do we know if the explainer is good? Kinda leads to thinking about who watches the watchers.
LLMs are quickly going to be able to start explaining their own thought processes better than any human can explain their own. I wonder how many new words we will come up with to describe concepts, or node-activating clusters of meaning, that the AI finds salient that we don't yet have a singular word for. Or, for that matter, how many of those concepts we will find meaningful at all. What will this teach us about ourselves?
LLMs are quickly going to be able to start explaining their own thought processes better than any human can explain their own. There is no there, and there is no thought process. There is something that produces text that appears to humans like there is something like thought going on. CF the ELIZA effect, but we must be wary of this anthropomorphizing language. There is no self-reflection, but if you ask an LLM program how it knows something, it will produce some text.
What if you ask it to emit the reflexive output, then feed that reflexive output back into the LLM for the conscious answer? What if you ask it to synthesize multiple internal streams of thought for an ensemble of interior monologues, then have all those argue with each other using logic, and then present a high-level answer from that panoply of answers?
What if you do? LLMs don't have reflexive output or internal streams of thought. They are simply complex processes that produce streams of tokens based on an inputted stream of tokens. They don't have a special response to tokens that indicate higher-level thinking to humans.
If the Gödel incompleteness theorem applies here, then the explanations are likely incomplete or self-referential.
Are there any examples of an LLM developing concepts that do not exist or cannot be inferred from its training set?
This is NT exactly building an understanding of LLMs from first principles. IMO we should broadly be following the imperfect example set forth by neuroscientists attempting to explain fairy scans and assigning functionality to various subregions in the brain. It is circular and unsafe, from an alignment perspective, to use a complex model to understand the internals of a simpler model. In order to understand GPT-4 then we need GPT-5. These approaches are interesting, but we should primarily focus on building our understanding of these models from building blocks that we already understand.
This work is part of the third pillar of our approach to alignment research. We want to automate the alignment research work itself. I feel like this isn't a yet-approved approach to AI alignment.
You mean Yudkowsky? I saw him on Lex Fridman, and he was entirely unconvincing. Why is everyone deferring to a bunch of effective altruism advocates when it comes to AI safety?
I heard him on Lex too, and it seemed to be just a given that AI is going to be deceptive and want to kill us all. I don't think there was a single example of how that could be accomplished given. I'm open to hearing thoughts on this. Maybe I'm not creative enough to see the obvious ways this could happen.
This is also why I go into chess matches against 1,400 ELO players. I cannot conceive of the specific ways in which they will beat me, a 600 ELO player, so I have good reason to suspect that I can win. I'm willing to bet the future of our species on my consistent victory in these types of matches, in fact. Because they have arguments that AI optimists are unable to convincingly address. Take this blog post for example, which between the lines reads, "We don't expect to be able to align these systems ourselves. So instead we're hoping these systems are able to align each other." Consider me not very soothed. FWIW, there are plenty of AI experts who have been raising alarms as well. Hinton and Cristiano, for example.
Even if we can explain the function of a single neuron, what do we gain? If the goal is to reason about safety of computer vision in automated driving as an example, we would need to understand the system as a whole. The whole point of neural networks is to solve nuanced problems we can't clearly define. The fuzziness of the problems those systems solve is fundamentally at odds with the intent to reason about them.
Has anyone here found a link to the actual paper? If I click on paper, I only see what seems to be an awkward version.